Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner with the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we meet the filmmaker behind the documentary that put a spotlight on one of the world's most brutal races that can be found here in the Northland. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. To tell us about this Northland winter race, I'm joined by Duluth filmmaker Marius Anderson, director of the documentary 40 Below, the toughest race in the world. Marius, welcome to the Northlandia podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're our first outside guest on the podcast. We've had other voices like through sound bites and such that are kind of already pre-recorded for our videos that we have associated with the column, but you are our first completely outside guest on the podcast.
Wow, thank you so much. I feel honored.
And as we get into talk about your film, was established right at the front. We've known each other for quite a bit now. It has been a while. It's been about half a decade now, almost, since we've seen each other. We met years ago in the Duluth Film Collective. We both have an interest and passion for film, narrative, and you especially documentary. We worked with each other on a couple short films, and it's just great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Same. So happy to see you again here.
And so I obviously know who you are, but tell our listeners about yourself and who you are and your journey as a filmmaker leading up to this film. Because you are a Duluth-based filmmaker, but you've had a journey and a life before that.
That's right, yeah. My name is Marius Anderson. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm actually German. I moved to Duluth from Berlin, Germany. I've lived there for 11 years and moved to Duluth in 2017. And I love Berlin, lived there for 11 years, went to film school there. I'm originally from the South. And at some point, I was running a half marathon in Stockholm, Sweden. And that's where I met my wife, Meredith. And she's from Duluth. And she was running the half marathon there, too. She was by herself. We met, and fast forward, now I live in Duluth. I've been living here for 7 years. We have 2 wonderful children. We're married. And I love Duluth. I love living up here in the Northland.
Mm-hmm. And I understand this film was your first feature film. You've done a series of shorts prior. I think the first one I saw of yours that you brought to the Duluth Film Collective, I can't remember his name, but it was a short documentary about the world's oldest hockey player here in Duluth.
That's right, Mark Sturdich. Yeah, the late, great Mark Sturdich. God bless him. Incredible story. At 93, he was, when I filmed him, that was for a short doc for CNN, for Great Big Story. And he, right here in Duluth, he was still playing hockey 3 times a week. And that was one of the first short docs I filmed here in the U.S. And since then, I've done a couple more short docs for CNN and also filmed a sports docu-series for Amazon Studios, filmed with Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, did a couple of really fun sport documentaries, but always for hire. So I was always blessed to be hired. One of my clients is also the German Bundesliga. It's like the German soccer league, kind of like the NFL, but for soccer in Germany. So I work for them every year. But it's always for hire. So they call me and ask if I would like to be the cameraman for them, which I really enjoy, of course. But I always had the dream of making my own feature-length sports documentary. That's where my big passion lies. And that's when it all started. I always searched for a topic, and at some point I came across this story for 40 Below.
So let's have you go ahead and just introduce the film. What is the film and what's it about?
Yes, the film is called 40 Below, the toughest race in the world. And here is the short story to sum it up. So it's been called the toughest endurance race in the world. And why would anyone do this, especially when it's 40 degrees below zero? Set in northern Minnesota, we meet Leah, a junk food eating scientist, and Bill, an accomplished ultramarathoner who just can't seem to finish this incredibly challenging race. They run, bike, or ski 135 miles over 3 days in the solitary woods, sometimes hallucinating and barely stopping to rest or sleep in the snow without getting frostbite or freezing to death. What can we learn from them about life, love, and happiness?
Wow. And how did you even find out about this to pursue? Because I'll be honest, like I've lived in the Northland my whole life, and I've worked in news now since 2018, and I hadn't even heard of this race prior to you started promoting your film. How did you find it?
Yeah, good question. So my father-in-law, my in-laws also live up here in Duluth, and he works for Miners Inc., the company that owns Super One, and two of the twins of the owner family, they've done this crazy race, and they told my father-in-law about it. And then my father-in-law told me about it because he knows I love watching sports. I love sports documentaries. And he just very briefly told me about it, and he said, you should look into this race. It's pretty crazy. It's like nothing else in the world. And specifically what I remember, what he told me is that these twins told him they were out in the race, and the race has a 60-hour cutoff time. So after 60 hours, if you don't cross the finish line, you can still finish, but officially you did not finish. It's called DNF. And these two twins were out on the trail. It's a remote snowmobile trail in the middle of nowhere in northern Minnesota. They were out on the trail for, I want to say, about 40, 50 hours, and then ran into another racer who has been out there also for the same length. And that racer was clearly hallucinating. And he told them that he's seeing dancing moose in front of him and asked if they would also see that right now. And that brief story my father-in-law told me, that's where it all started. And I asked myself, wow, this is an organized sporting event. Why would anyone volunteer to do this, to go through so much pain and suffer at the coldest place in the continental US for 60 hours until you actually start hallucinating? I've never heard anything like that from like an Ironman or a marathon or anything. So this must be a completely different level. And that's how it all started. I looked up the race. I called the race director and asked him for permission to film this race, and he's a funny guy, and he on the phone he immediately said, yes, I allow you to film it, but why don't we do this? It's great that you're German. We actually had never had a German here. Why don't we do this? Why don't you do the race first this year, and then 1 year later you can make a film about it? And I said, no, that's not a good idea. Why don't we do it the other way around? Let me first make a documentary about it.
Oh my gosh, it's like, half the fun of like, making these documentaries and films is like you kind of live vicariously through them. Like I love covering the Bear Creek Sled Dog Marathon every year. I would never do it. It sounds horrible from especially if you're not used to that lifestyle, but I love you feel like you're living vicariously through them. So I can imagine why you might not want to necessarily try doing the race, or then you become the story rather than
right.
Focusing on the characters or the people that you end up talking with.
My big question was from the beginning on, and that's what I try to answer a little bit in the film. Why in the world would anyone do this? Why? And so, obviously I said, that's not a good idea that I first do the race. Let me first make a documentary about it.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the timeline for this? Like when you learned about the race, that you kind of start coordinating the planning of coverage of the race, you're doing pre-interviews, and there's the actual race itself. I know the race that the film is on is in 2019, which of course is during that insane polar vortex. Just walk me through the timeline of everything.
Right. So I'm pretty well connected in the Twin Cities with other cameramen, with other filmmakers, with independent filmmakers. And I thought, okay, let's call up a few friends, filmmaker friends, and ask if they want to help me with this, that I have a fun idea. And these are filmmaker friends I've worked together with on other short films, on other projects, and people always love to work on other people's projects and help each other out. And coincidentally, this was already kind of like, 2 weeks before that, and the polar vortex was already on the horizon, I believe, and also the days before, there were already news, like that schools were closing down, and the governor and all the news, they said, please don't leave your house until you absolutely have to. So when I called up my filmmaker friends and it's like, hey, are you still interested in helping me out? Suddenly nobody had time, they still talk to me, but suddenly everyone was like, oh, you know what, I forgot this thing or that thing, and I'm actually quite busy, so as I mentioned earlier, my main job is actually I work as a cameraman. So I get hired, for Amazon Originals, for CNN. I did a documentary for PBS, Iron Opera, that we shot up here. Some of the listeners maybe watched that one. It's on YouTube. And I just realized, okay, I will probably just have to film as much as possible by myself. But at the same time, I knew that it would be quite dangerous if I just go out there by myself, and that these are extreme conditions, really dangerous. I mean, there's times in the race where racers for about 12 hours go through the night, and don't see a single soul. So it's so remote. They don't see any sign of humanity, nothing, no car, no house, no human being, no nothing. And that's quite dangerous if you run out of batteries for your lights and everything. And I knew that before, and I knew same for me as a filmmaker. I can't just go out there by myself like I've done for other short documentaries. This is really a different level, and I have to be careful. So I called up a couple of friends up here and found one good friend of mine, John. He helped me, so he was basically kind of like my driver, helper, assistant. And then I found one other incredible cameraman from Minneapolis, and a cameraman slash helper, producer, driver, Nick Hansen up here, that were basically the second unit, and they were out there by themselves. So in total, we were 4 people, myself plus John, and then 2 other people. And to that other crew, I just told them, always stay with the front of the pack, kind of like the leading racers, and John and I will try to basically film everything else and follow our main subjects, Bill and Leah.
And how did you find Bill and Leah? Like, how did that aspect of the story kind of unfold? How did you find these people?
Yes, yeah. So if you want to see a first glimpse of this film, we have a fun trailer on our website. The website is 40belowmovie.com. So 40, the number 40, 40belowmovie.com. And there you will already meet Bill and Leah. And Bill is quite a funny character. So when I knew I was going to make this film, and I talked to Ken Kruger, the race director, he allowed me to make the film. I told him, I don't want this to be an event film. I don't want to make it just about the film. I don't want the documentary to start with a race and end with whoever wins it or with a finish line. I want to tell this crazy race, this crazy story through the eyes of 2 protagonists, one male, one female. And then I asked Ken, like, who do you recommend of the people that signed up for this race in 2019, January 2019? And he said, there's one person, Leah Grun, and she actually also lives in Duluth, and she's an extremely accomplished biker. She had done the Arrowhead several times and finished it several times. And she's just incredible. She recently did a race up in Alaska, a 1,000-mile long race, and she was the only woman that finished it. It's just incredible, like the races she does. So he gave me her contact and told me a little bit about her, that she's really nice and great, and that she would be a good fit. And I called her up after that phone call, and we met for coffee, and she was immediately on board and loved the idea of the documentary. And then I said to Ken, okay, I also need a male protagonist who would be a good fit with a little bit of a character. And that's why I said you should watch the trailer, or maybe for some people that have already watched the documentary, you'll get this hint. So Ken said, there's this one guy, his name is Epic Bill Bradley. Here's his number, and that's all I'm going to give you. And the rest is history. I called him up, and he's extremely energetic. He was immediately fired up and said, let's do this. And so 2 weeks before the race, I met him up in International Falls. That's where the race starts. It goes from International Falls, Minnesota to Tower, Minnesota, 135 miles. And Bill actually, that year, he went up there 3 weeks before the race just to get used to the temperature, because he's originally from California, north of San Francisco. And he always says that he believes, I would say roughly half of the participants, so it's 150 people, half of them I think are from the upper Midwest. And Bill, coming from California, he's just not used to this temperature. So he believes that it's a little bit of an advantage of people that are from here, because you just grow up with it. You grow up with these temperatures. You maybe even already as a kid you help snow blowing and working outside, and you're just used to it. And he says every time he lands here in International Falls, it's like going to Mars for him.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's just, I highly recommend just watching the film to get like the specifics of Leah and Bill and their backgrounds leading up to this point in the film. But maybe we just talk a little bit about what does it take to qualify for those races? Because you can't just sign up and do it. As I understand, even an Ironman won't get you in the race.
Right. That's one of my favorite lines of the film. So I asked the race director, what do you need to qualify? To me personally, I always thought an Ironman is such an incredible race and fun to watch. And I always thought people that do an Ironman and finish it are just absolutely incredible. I didn't know that there's anything beyond that, like that is even tougher or much tougher. And I asked Ken Kruger, the race director, I asked him, it's in the film, I said, would an Ironman qualify for this race? And he said, no. And he said, even if you finish an Ironman or win an Ironman, which only a few people in the world have ever done, won an Ironman, even then they don't let you into the Arrowhead 135. They would ask you, what else have you done? Something even tougher. So to qualify for it, so they want solitude on the trail. So Ken only allows roughly 150 racers every year, and because he wants the race to spread out, he says it's a completely different race if it's several hundred people and people team up and everything, and if it's crowded out on the trail. But he wants the solitude. That's why I mentioned earlier, sometimes racers are out there for about 12 hours all by themselves, day and night. And to qualify for it, you have to basically have done a similar race. So I believe a 100-mile winter bike race, for example, or a 200-mile on-road race, or like similar winter races. And there are other ones in the world, that are extremely tough. There are races up in Antarctica, and there's some races that are really hot. There's an equivalent. It's called the Badwater. It's in Death Valley. It's 135 miles. But there's a big difference there. If you do that race is also extremely tough. And I have the highest respect of anyone doing that race and finishing it. But there's a big difference. And Bill has done that race. He's even done a triple Badwater. So 3 times he's done the distance, 3 times 135 miles. And finished it. But he explains there's a big difference in Badwater and Death Valley. It's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The difference is at Badwater, you have a crew that can help you. So next to you, you can have people in a car, in a van, drive next to you. Whenever you get too hot, you can get into the air-conditioned van and drink something, have a Coca-Cola or whatever, and then go back out and continue. At Arrowhead, there's absolutely no outside help allowed. So Bill says in the film, the difference is at Badwater, you do have a crew that can help you. At Arrowhead, the only time you have a crew is when you're hallucinating, because it's you out there by yourself.
Yeah, and if again, I highly recommend you watch the film. If you do, there's a sequence or a series of moments that refer to these hallucinations, and they're quite something. I was not prepared for what those were going to involve, and that was kind of hilarious. So, we talk about planning out your coverage of the race, and things got a little interesting when news was coming out with Polar Vortex. I myself, that was when I covered my first Bear Grease, which was around the same time. So yeah, and that was cold. That was a very bitterly cold. How did you prepare for that bitter cold, both for yourselves personally, keep yourself safe, but as well as your camera equipment? Because that's a whole other challenge that maybe people don't necessarily see or fully understand, that the equipment doesn't always function properly in bitter colds. Like most, even really good camera equipment, if you're actually looking at their specs, like great cameras, I say they're rated for 30 degrees, which is like, even in Duluth, it's like, okay, that's like half the year. That's technically not rated for our outside conditions.
That's
and you're
right, yeah.
really pushing the limits on this equipment to be, if it is like rated for 30 degrees, you're pushing like 70 degrees below what it's technically rated for. And that's not even necessarily accounting for the wind chill.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny when I think about these ranges that they say. And I remember one thing oftentimes, so this trail is really remote. There's only a few road crossings. So we would sometimes drive close to these road crossings and then would have to walk for quite a while. to get close to the trail. And quite often, I remember we would get out of our car. It was really warm, of course, in the car. We kept the car running. That's one thing I learned in Minnesota. You have to do that at these extreme temperatures if you want to make sure your car is still running when you come back. And as soon as we got out of the car, within minutes, oftentimes, our phones would just shut off. You know, it's basically like putting your phone in a freezer. At some point, it just shuts off. And that were the moments where I knew, okay, we're in a real adventure here. And to prepare for these temperatures myself, I talked to Bill, I talked to Leah, I talked to quite a few racers, and most of the equipment they use, there's a gear check where they have to prove that they have the right equipment to stay alive. And so I knew they know exactly what they're doing and they know their equipment. Most of their equipment you don't buy in a regular sporting goods store. It's some of it is actually the same gear and equipment you would use on Mount Everest, you know. So I asked them for some tips and just bought some really good jackets and just had layers after layers after layers and made sure my team had the same one. One of my friends, Nick, I think he has these beaver gloves, you know, that I also noticed one person in the race actually has one. And the person in the race actually had his thumb freeze off in a race in Antarctica. And he said it got so cold, but he said this race during the Arrowhead, it was even colder. But now he's wearing beaver gloves, and those are perfectly warm for him and not clammy. So just a little side note that I thought was fun. So one of my guys, Nick Hansen, also had really cool beaver gloves. And yeah, I just had the right jackets. And then as far as equipment goes, I knew that these cameras and batteries and sound and everything and monitors are not necessarily rated for anything close to that, you know.
No, not at all.
I was just hoping, you know, that there's also no way to test it. You know, you don't want to test it at extreme conditions and then maybe something breaks or something doesn't work. So I was just hoping for the best. And one trick, what we learned early was to bring a lot of batteries, have them all fully charged, and keep the batteries very close to our body heat. So we would put those in the inner pockets very close to our bodies, because I always said, you know, hopefully, if nothing else, hopefully our bodies are still warm. And that worked. But I remember clearly, you know, that there were moments where I knew I put batteries that were at 100%, let's say on the left side of my inner pockets at 100%. And then a couple hours later, when I would out there in the crazy -40 temperatures, sometimes the wind chill was even -60, even colder. Hours later, when I would pop these full batteries in, they would sometimes only show 30% left. So the cold would just drain them as well. And yeah, that was definitely quite a challenge. But it all worked out at the end. One thing I noticed was that sometimes, you know, when you hold these cameras and it was all handheld, and when you do a pan, those small monitors on them would just kind of like be delayed. It was a little bit wobbly, and like you pan left,
kind of looks blurry almost,
right.
You know. That's kind of how my experience is as well.
It's like a little bit wobbly and like delayed, so it's like half a second later the pan is on the screen, you know. And I was kind of like, wow, that's a little bit funky. And I learned later that the crystals in these monitors also just get so slow and then start freezing, you know. So, and luckily that didn't affect the footage at all. So all the footage worked out well. There was not a second that we lost because of cold weather or anything. So I'm extremely thankful for that. And we had special gear. So the cameras we used, they're not waterproof, but they're so-called weather sealed. So they were with certain lenses that are just really tight and don't let moisture in. And normally when I work as a cameraman for other big documentaries or for whatever it is, we bring a lot of lenses. We swap lenses all the time. For this one, I told my crew, just find a good zoom lens, you know, and keep that one on, because I knew as soon as you take it off and then go back in the car, go back outside, it might fog up and start freezing or whatever. Just keep that lens on and try your best.
Yeah, and also clean the lens before you start filming, because once you try to clean it later, it's gonna fog and freeze. And
That's right. Yeah, everything that has moisture will freeze out there. And in fact, one of the biggest things the racers have to be careful is frostbite. So it happens, you know, that people get frostbite on their toes or on their fingers. So they have to be really careful with that. And I actually just a couple of days ago I was at a film event where we showed the film in the cities, and I talked to the race medic of the Arrowhead 135. He was also there, and he told me that last year there was a racer that came into one of the 3 checkpoints. They only have 3 checkpoints over 135 miles. And last year, one racer came in and said he has slightly blurry vision. He's not sure what's going on. And the medic realized that he actually has frostbite on one of his eyeballs.
Oh, geez.
So that sounded quite extreme. And the racer said, I have blurry vision, and also I can't really feel my fingers anymore. And so the medic said, yeah, you're out. Like, this race is over. You're 2 for 2, basically. There's 2 reasons why, unfortunately, we have to pull you. I'm sorry. And yeah, I think everything is fine now, but you just really have to be careful out there.
Yeah, because I think I remember in the documentary they said that that's like the race has like one major rule: no one dies. Like, no one can die. But I think in that, if I understand correctly, like based off of how cold it would be that year, they went even further by saying that you can't, if you get even just one frostbite, you're done.
Right.
It doesn't sound, unless I'm misunderstanding, that's not normally the case, but that year that was. Like, you get one frostbite, you're done.
Right, exactly. And they're just trying to, I think, they want everyone obviously to survive, but also everyone to stay healthy and be back to normal afterwards and not lose any fingers or toes or whatever. And I think an interesting part is that every person that enters this race has already accomplished so much, and they are some of the mentally toughest people in the world, that just push and push and push themselves and never ever quit. And I think sometimes, that's my personal opinion, maybe the race director and the medics and the teams there maybe have to protect people from themselves sometimes, because maybe mentally, maybe their brain still tells them, hey, I can still push and push, and they don't realize that they don't feel their hands anymore and their fingers. So there's quite a few stories there. Also, the race medic told me that one year there was one racer that made a mistake. Basically, the race medic says you can be 2 mistakes away from dying out there. So if you do one mistake, you can probably still correct it. If you make 2 major mistakes, that can really cost you your life if you're not careful. And he told me nobody died so far, which is great, of course. And the medic told me that one year there was one racer out there that made the big mistake that in the middle of the race, he unzipped his jacket. He felt a bit warm, and it was a really cold year. He unzipped his jacket, and then at the same time also he couldn't feel his fingers anymore. He had taken his gloves off, and you only have a few seconds until your fingers start to get really cold and basically start freezing, and then you can't use them anymore. So his jacket was unzipped, and also he couldn't feel his fingers anymore, so he couldn't use them anymore. And he thought, okay, what am I going to do next? And he knew there was another racer behind him that he had just passed a couple hours earlier, so he knew, okay, I'll just wait right here, and that other racer will come by and help me just close my jacket again, because he couldn't do it. His fingers were basically frozen. He could not close the zipper. What he didn't know is that racer behind him, shortly after they met, after he was passed, decided to bivvy, to sleep on the side of the trail. So there was no other racers. So that racer that had the jacket open turned around, walked backwards, and luckily walked into a third person after a couple hours that just helped him close his jacket. Because the race medic told me otherwise that could have gone really, really bad if you don't have your jacket closed out there.
Jeez, that's crazy. At any point, like when you were, planning this out, and then also while you're on the trail, because, when you're doing the planning, it's in the documentary as well, you're watching them kind of go over some of the preparation required and some tips for how to stay warm and this. You ever catch yourself going, what am I doing? Like, am I really going to do this? Am I really doing this right now? Like, did that fear ever take over at all, or kind of sneak in a little bit?
Well, I don't want to compare me to the racers. What they do is incredible, and I have the highest respect, again, for anyone finishing this race, but also anyone starting it and just doing this race. And one thing we maybe have in common a little bit is I also don't quit. So if I decide to do something, I will do it and I will finish it no matter what. So even if I get really cold or wet or anything, I would never quit just because I don't feel comfortable, And but to answer your question, there were a few moments where I made the same mistake, as I just said, of that one gentleman. I also took my gloves off because I had thin gloves on because I tested it earlier and I still had to use the gloves, to change settings and change the aperture on the cameras.
It's
and,
hard to use these small buttons with big, thick gloves.
Right. It's just, and I remember very clearly there were moments where there was one moment where I was filming someone. I was like, oh, wow, this is magical. This is probably going into the film. This is really incredible. But I couldn't use my camera the way I was used to it. And I was just thinking, okay, screw it. I took my gloves off and used this, this ice cold camera, that is basically metal. I mean, anyone up here that has without gloves has touched, like to me, it compares to pumping gas in the winter. If you touch that ice cold metal, you regret it immediately. So it was a similar thing. I took my gloves off. I filmed this scene. I got it. And immediately after that, I was like, oh, wait, there was a big mistake. So I ran back to the car. It was a couple minutes away. Car was still running. And just turned the heat up to full blast and just had my bare fingers in front of the heat vent where the heat came out. And just like that for like at least 10 minutes, just to get them sort of back to normal. And that moment I remember very clearly. I was like, what are you doing? I was asking myself, why are you out here? No one is asking you for this. This is not that you were hired to do this and that you signed up for this. I had the idea to do this. Nobody asked me for that. Why are you doing it? So there are moments like that, also during filming where it's like, is this really worth it? But like I said, I knew I had the big goal to make a really fun documentary. And I knew once I started this, once I signed up for it, there was just no return.
Mm-hmm. And how did I know one thing when I had covered Bear Grease during that polar vortex, I dressed up really warm and but one thing I didn't account for, I'm curious if you had the same issue as well, was your eyes. Because I was dressed to the brim, but I didn't think about my eyes, and I had to stand outside for a lengthy period of time waiting for the winter to finish. And my eyes were just like, the reporter I was with commented that my eyelashes were like just covered in ice, and it was just painful because I did not. Now I bring goggles with to Bear Grease, to warm up my eyes if I need to, but I did not account for that. And I was only outside for the finish line up there for maybe an hour or two. But you were continuously following the race. So how did you do? What did you do with your eyes? Did you do anything?
Yeah, no, we had a similar experience. I also remember. In fact, I have a photo. Actually, it's on our Instagram account. By the way, the Instagram handle is 40 Below Movie. If you search for that, give us a follow, and you'll be updated about all future screenings and see some behind the scenes stuff in the trailer. And there's a photo on there, a similar thing where my eyelids are kind of frozen and a little bit, and but honestly, if I think back, a lot of it is just a blur. I don't even know where I was or when, and we hardly slept. I think over those 60 hours, we slept maybe for 3 hours one time, and then my buddy John, I remember I had just fallen asleep and slept maybe for 2.5, 3 hours, and then my buddy John was I woke up, he was grabbing my chest and shaking me, and I woke up, looked in his eyes, and he was smiling, and he said, "Hey, buddy, Leah is getting close to the finish line. You may want to wake up." And I got up, I jumped up immediately, grabbed the gear, ran back to the truck, and we drove there. And but a lot of it was just a blur, and I was just so focused on the film and so happy making this film and already getting so much incredible footage that I didn't realize a lot of the surroundings, or where normally I would definitely be cold, but I just try to ignore a lot of those factors.
Ignore the factors telling you that, maybe I should back up a little bit. So getting back with how you covered the race, besides there's a couple checkpoints along the race, but besides the checkpoints, how did you find people on the trail? Especially the Bill and Leah, your main characters who you're specifically following. I'm sure everyone else is kind of you get them when you get them. But how did you keep track of them on the trail? Yeah,
good question. Very briefly about the checkpoints, that's another interesting fact for anyone trying to compare this to any other sporting events in the world, basically. So if you compare this to an Ironman, which again, I find so incredible if people do that, Ironman is swimming, then biking, then running. Just for the marathon part alone, it ends with a marathon. On the marathon part alone, you have 28 aid stations. So that means you run by 28 aid stations. But even between those, at any moment, in my opinion, at an organized, highly sponsored Ironman event, at any moment, if you collapse, there's someone there. There's a medic there that immediately picks you up, grabs you, and makes sure you survive and you get an IV and you're in the medic tent. At this race, compared to 28 aid stations at the running part of an Ironman, at this race, much longer distance, 60 hours, 135 miles, they have 3 aid stations over 135 miles. So every 20 hours, one aid station or one checkpoint. And at the last one, all you get is water. That's just a tent in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing else there. So that to me is already so extreme and describes this race. Plus, you definitely don't have this moment where at any time somebody would grab you. Like I said, Bill, one of our stars in the film, he has been out there for 12 hours, not seeing a single soul. So just imagine going through the night for 12 hours and you better hope that, the batteries in your blinkies and the batteries in your headlamp still works, and then that's just one out of 1,000 things that you have to make sure, or did I bring enough water, or does my stove still work, all that kind of stuff. How did we follow the people? So some people choose to wear a tracker, but the year we filmed it, it was actually not mandatory. So they changed it after that. Now, if you do the race, it's mandatory to have a GPS tracker. The year we filmed it, it was not mandatory. Bill and Leah actually had trackers. So there is a way on a website to roughly see where they are, but it's really roughly. It's basically like within the last 60 minutes, they were roughly there. I think only every like one or 2 hours or so, it sends off a small dot on a map. So it's like roughly they're there. That was good, but we also followed other people. One of the people is John Storkamp. He's an incredibly accomplished ultra marathoner. He has won the Arrowhead several times, and we also interviewed him in the film. And a little side fun fact, he lives in Hastings, Minnesota. When I interviewed him, when I met him there, he said, yeah, let's just meet there. What's a good time? Okay, 11 a.m. or so. When we showed up there, he had just showered, and he said, oh, this was perfect. I just did a little morning run, or I think it was 10 a.m. we met. He said, I did a little morning run with friends. And I was like, oh, how far do you run on your morning run? And he's like, oh, we did a marathon this morning just to like warm up,
Just casually, like,
just
casually, I ran a marathon.
It's like, yeah, and that was because I asked him. He was not bragging about it or something. I was like, okay.
So just normal day routine
just
for
a
him.
normal day routine. And John, like I said, he's won the race. He's won Arrowhead several times. One year, actually, he won it at the beginning of the race. He was still at McDonald's in International Falls. There's one close to the starting line and still having breakfast at 7 a.m. when everyone already started. And he finished his breakfast casually. He likes to always start in the back. We also see that in the film, likes to pass everyone and chat with people a little bit. And he knows I have 60 hours, 135 miles. There's a long way to go. There's plenty of time to catch up with everyone. So one year he was still at McDonald's at 7 a.m. and finished his breakfast, took it easy, and then still won the race. That's how extremely good he is. And the reason why I'm telling this is he does not wear a tracker. So the year we followed him, and we had interviewed him before, and I wanted to every once in a while catch up with him, but nobody knows where he is. And in fact, if I remember it correctly, I asked him just off camera, like, why do you not wear a tracker? And he said, this is my one time of year where nobody knows where I am. Not even my wife knows where I am. This is just me time. This is just myself, for 60 hours. And, I can focus on a lot of things, in my life and my job and this and that. And nobody is going to bother me. So I thought that was quite an interesting aspect. So he did not have a tracker. Luckily, we still met him every once in a while. We were just, hoping and roughly estimating at his pace where he could be. And there is an incredible scene in the middle of the night at checkpoint 3, close to the finish line, where he comes in and there's actually a huge icicle that goes down from his helmet. And it's also in the trailer. He comes up to that checkpoint, to the tent.
Maybe in the trailer, but I have to say, It's even better in the film.
Yeah.
The full scene, the trailer doesn't quite, it is a glimpse into that most Minnesotans will get a real kick out of.
I'm not giving away anything of the story, but it's a fun little part, and he shows up there, and it's bitter cold, it's probably around 40 below Fahrenheit and Celsius, by the way, for any international listeners. This is where both meet. So -40 Fahrenheit is also -40 Celsius. So that's why it's very easy for everyone in the world to understand how cold this is. So John Steenkamp shows up at this checkpoint where we're at, and we just see a headlamp in the distance. This guy comes up with an icicle running down from his helmet, and he asks the guys that run this the checkpoint, what temperature is it actually? Because he has a thermometer on his sled, and he says, my thermometer on the sled, it bottoms out at -20. It doesn't go any lower. How cold is it really? And I believe they say it's like -30 something or whatever. And so he's like, yeah, I guess it's the wrong thermometer for this race. I should get a different one next year.
So as you know, you're going around filming, like obviously you have, Bill Nia, who you've already kind of talked with ahead of time, and like so they already know you're making a documentary of them. How did the other racers feel about you being there? Like, 'cause, you're just kind of finding them on the trail. Obviously you talk to lots of different people along the trail. How did they feel about seeing you guys interacting with you? Did some of them maybe think you were a hallucination sometimes? Were there something like, get away from me, I'm kind of dying right now, I don't want a camera on me right now as I'm actively like trying not to die?
Yeah, regarding hallucinations, there's actually, I don't have any regrets, and everything worked out just incredibly well, especially for the circumstances of the temperatures and everything, and us being such a small crew, just like 2 tiny camera crews basically. But regarding hallucinations, there's one tiny little regret I have for myself where I maybe made a little bit of a mistake, and it was very close to the finish line. And one racer who's in the film and who talks about hallucinations, it's a really funny scene. We were out on the trail close to the finish line and saw in the distance that gentleman coming. Ryan Wanless is his name. He has a really cool hat, like I think like a beaver hat or something. And he comes up from the distance, and I see him, and I thought, okay, this could maybe be a cool scene if I just film this racer, just walk by. But if I jump into the trees, to the side and film him from there, and he just walks by, and there's trees in the foreground. And so I said to John, my buddy, like, let's jump in there real quick. So we walked on the trail, just jumped behind like 3-4 trees, and waited for him to walk up there. And I started recording, and he walks up there and he stops. And that's for some reason, I don't know why, I stopped recording because, I just wanted to be nice and ask him first, is it okay if we film you and interview you? Foolish of me. I should have just kept the camera running. Everyone there was always fine with being filmed and was so nice and friendly. So I turned the camera off, and he must have seen us in the distance, already hallucinating, seen like 2 maybe could be people like jump into the tree line. And so he comes up to the camera. I stop recording, and then he says, are you guys real? Are you guys humans? And that's the part I did not film. I wish I would have filmed it.
That would have been perfect.
That would have been pretty cool.
But it makes for a great story, though.
Right. And then I said, yes, we are real, even though you saw us in the distance jumping into the trees for no particular reason. And then I turned the camera back on and started recording, and he talked a little bit about hallucinations. And it's one of there's many funny scenes in the film, and that's one of the funniest scenes, I feel like, when we show it to crowds.
It is, yeah. It's pretty
people really laugh.
Entertaining.
But in general, talking about filming, everyone is so nice out there. And everything I film for documentaries, I always try to do this, what I call fly on the wall style, or cinema verite, where you tell all the subjects, ignore us, we're not here. We're just filming whatever's happening, don't talk to us, just do your thing, and we are the fly on the wall watching this. And oftentimes it does not work really great, because if you film, for example, in an office situation, as soon as people know they're being filmed, or maybe there's even a sound guy with them, or a bigger crew, people act differently. And people, even though they're not actors, they try to act and, just change a little bit. What was fantastic in this race, people don't have time to act. People also don't have time to focus on you. They're just just in their world. So it was just fantastic to really be this fly on the wall. And from the beginning on, I told my other camera team and also myself, I want to be as close as possible, always be right there with the camera, right in their face, and always be as close as possible. And I told the other team, don't even ask, can we do this or that? Just do it. Everyone is fine, and everyone is just so busy with the race, and that was fantastic. They have to make sure they survive out there. They have to make sure they make the cutoff times. Each of the checkpoints has a cutoff time, and also the final cutoff time at the finish line, 60 hours. So they have so much other things to do, make sure they still have water or use their stove to melt snow to create water and this and that. They don't have time to worry about a camera team. So that was just fantastic. I would say very often people would not even notice that we were there. They were just in their world running this extreme race.
Mm-hmm. And I know you touched on that you kind of wish that you kept recording and such for that moment with when he thought that you were a hallucination, questioned if you were real or not. But I feel like that also kind of speaks to one thing I liked. It's a little detail in the film, but as basically a mini documentary in myself, because it's like for here at the News Tribune and then work in TV news, I make basically mini documentaries. And there's a scene, I won't give away what the context is for it at all, but there is one point where you were asked to turn off the camera or stop recording. And without hesitation, you cut. And then brought it back up later when whatever was going on was resolved. And as a filmmaker myself, could really appreciate that, because you see that in documentaries and such, like a lot of times that happens on Netflix, but like they're kind of still recording, or it's like they move it away, but they still have the audio going, so you kind of hear what's going on, so they haven't really cut. So I thought that was really cool that you actually respected that and just hard cut.
Right. There was only one moment exactly where that happened, and that was just because, like I said, I have the highest respect for all racers and for everyone in this race and everyone around this race. So I was so thankful that Ken, the race director, allowed me to make this race and did not set any boundaries or any limits. He only said never interfere with the race, never help any racers, which of course is a no-brainer. And I knew in that moment really quickly. That was the only time where they said, please turn the cameras off. Okay, let's turn them off. But watch the film, and there's definitely nothing you missed. It's a really powerful moment because within seconds after that, we turned the cameras back on, and it's a big moment in the film.
So getting back to now the original question that's kind of started this whole thing, because you set out to make this documentary to find out why on earth do people do this, and then also why do they keep doing it for the repeat racers. What kind of do you think you got for that answer? Like, why do people do this? Why did you do this? Especially you kind of in a way indirectly did it yourself, or at least vicariously. What answer did you come to with that?
Well, maybe I started with why I did it. I love sports documentaries, and I always searched for a topic of my own first feature-length sports documentary that hopefully not only shows the sport and not. I didn't want to follow a team or something that maybe is only interesting for a certain group of people. I wanted to make a film for everyone, and we've already showed this film around the country at many festivals and won a few awards that I'm really happy about. And one thing I always love is that there's people of all ages come out and watch the film and love it. And we showed it in Minneapolis, and I remember there were two elderly ladies in their 70s probably, and they said afterwards, wow, we loved the film so much. We would never do the film, but now we're motivated to go out and exercise a bit more and do walks, and even in the winter. And this was just so motivating, just to never quit. And that was one of the goals I had, why I did it. I would love to entertain people with the film and make them laugh, but also show how tough the race is, but also motivate people, just show people around the world to never quit and what that can do. Why people in the race do it, I guess you have to watch the documentary. There's many different reasons why people do it. And I guess an overarching topic is just that people that do the race, they know that your body is capable of so much more than you initially think. And that's, I think, for most humans, Some people may think I could never do this 5K run or this half marathon or a full marathon. And Leah says it best in the race. She says she believes pretty much everyone could go out and do the Arrowhead 135 and finish it, but it requires an incredible amount of preparation and training. And she believes that not a lot of people would actually go out and do it and put the work in that it takes to do the race. But yeah, for other reasons, I guess it's best to watch the documentary. But the overarching theme is not quitting, and you also see that with the main star of the film, Bill Bradley. When I met him and filmed him for this race, he had accomplished some of the most incredible events in the world. Like I said, a triple Badwater, so 3 times 135 miles at 120 degrees in Death Valley. He has done a triple Ironman. He's biked across America, on a bike, and swam the English Channel from France to England and climbed different mountains, all sorts of crazy stuff. He actually holds a world record in the Grand Canyon. He has crossed it 7 times rim to rim continuously. No one else has crossed it more times than him. So that's basically running down the south rim, running up the north rim. That's 1 time. And he's done that 7 times rim to rim continuously. But the one big challenge is this race, the Arrowhead 135. When I met him, he had never finished it in 7 attempts, even though he accomplished so many other things. This one, he had never finished. So it's all about never quitting and always trying again.
Man. And last question I have for you, at least bigger question. And I usually ask this of the reporters we have in the podcast, talking about the stories that they have brought to Northlandia. Because, Northlandia is about, curiosities, unique, strange, interesting stories here in the Northland. Why do you think that this story, this race, these people who do this race kind of fits in that Northlandia? Because to me, that seems like the whole question of why. Why do people do this? It 100% sparked my curiosity.
Right. I think there's a lot of factors why this film could be interesting for viewers up here. One reason is because it's right around the corner. It's from International Falls to Tower, Minnesota. It's not far from Duluth here. And what's funny is a lot of people have never heard of this race, the Arrowhead 135. Even if you go to International Falls, I experienced that where the starting line is. If you talk to people there, some people up there also, if you say, what do you think about the Arrowhead 135? Some people there have never heard of it. They're like, what is that? It's kind of like this closed family, friends event, of people just coming back every year. And so that's another thing. And then also just if you want a good time, a good entertainment, this is it's not a sad story, it's a positive story. It's a really fun film for the entire family, and many comedic fun moments in the film, but also a lot of really tough moments where you're happy that you sit in your seat in the movie theater and hopefully have a warm jacket on, and that you don't have to be out there, but that you can just experience it in 1 hour 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And I know that it has international appeal. People have been able to watch from all over and find something to connect with in the story. But there is something to be said about, this is our backyard, and we live in these cold conditions every year. I feel like anyone living in Duluth could probably tell you where they were during the polar vortex. But these people were out in I think after watching this film, how can you complain about having to go through the polar vortex, knowing that there was these people that were out there for 60 hours or right around there trying to push their bodies to the limits? That's just crazy. And then there's this documentary crew following them around. All right, Marius. Well, before you wrap it up here, we already talked on where people can go to the website, they can go to social media to get updates of the film. But you mentioned to me this podcast, it's going to come out mid-January, and you have an upcoming screening that people can go to in person coming up.
Yes, so we actually had our world premiere this past spring in 2023 at the wonderful theater in Minneapolis, the main theater. We screened it there during MSPIF and actually had several encore screenings. Every screening was sold out. The crowd loved it so much. And we actually won the Audience Choice Award that I'm incredibly proud of. So out of, I believe, 90 films they showed at the festival, our film was rated number 1 by the audience. It was the most loved film there by the audience, which I'm so happy about. And now we're actually bringing the film back to the main theater in Minneapolis for a week-long run. And the first screening is going to be on Friday, January 26th. So if you just go on the website of the main, you can buy tickets there, and don't wait to buy your tickets, because so far most screenings we had, almost every screening in fact, actually sold out, and I will be there on Friday, and we will have some special guests and also some giveaways, and we will screen it there for a week. And then also on that same weekend, actually, we will be screening it in International Falls because on that Monday, that's when the next Arrowhead race will start. So the weekend leading up to that Monday, we're also going to screen it in International Falls. And to find out about future screenings, and at some point down the road after we showed it, hopefully around the world at festivals and in theaters, at some point we will also have streaming options for people to watch it from home, but that will still take a while. To stay updated about that, you can follow our newsletter. It's on our website. Again, the website is 40belowmovie.com. So that's 40belowmovie.com. Sign up for the newsletter there, and you will be informed about every single screening and streaming options. And same on social media. So on Instagram, it's 40belowmovie, and also facebook.com/40belowmovie.
All right, well, Marius, thank you so much for joining Northlandia podcast. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a wonderful time.
And thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you or someone you know has a unique story that you believe can have a place here in Northlandia, let us know by emailing northlandia@duluthnewstribune.news. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.